When it comes to the Houston mass murders, I've read around 8 books. Countless online articles, newspaper articles, documentaries, docuseries, listened to podcasts, been on a Reddit frenzy lately, more reading than commenting. I even watched an independent film in a madman's world that's done by Josh Vargas. You can find that on YouTube. So while there are variations in the stories told about Dean Corll and the Houston mass murders, and there's even new evidence and information discovered, the stories of what happened to the boys stays relatively the same. And many of these stories are hypothetical, and they're based on tales told either by the accomplices or other people who just assume what happened. You'll even find, like in Wayne's personal letters that he wrote, contradicting stories, and you'll read them all over the place. The primary narrative was almost entirely summed up in the first book published on the case, and that's called Mass Murder in Houston by John Gerwell. I'm going to do a whole TikTok series of books that I read just to kind of show you guys if you guys wanted to read those and follow along and kind of get where I'm getting my information from. There you go. So look out for that on TikTok. The history of that book, by the way, and where it was published and by who is like a whole story in and of itself. So yeah, look for that. Maybe I'll talk about it in the finale. But definitely get your hands on a copy of it and add it to your collections. It's kind of hard to find. And if you find it, it might be expensive. I got really lucky. So sorting through what is fact and hypothetical about these cases, this, if you want to lump it into this case of the Houston mass murders, along with the identification of the remains, it's probably one of the most challenging aspects when putting together a journalistic style story about these cases. Different authors take different approaches. Catherine Ramsland focused on the mental health of the accomplices who were teenagers when they did this and talked about grooming and talked about those things. Lisa Olson went another direction, and she told things through the eyes of Dr. Sharon Derrick and wanted to talk about the scientist aspect. But you could read with The Man with the Candy. This is the second book, I believe, that was put out, and that was still put out in the 1970s. And this is Jack Olson, no relation to Lisa Olson, I don't think. He talks with a lot of the kids, and so he gives a lot of their stories, and there's a lot of interviews. So there's just a whole bunch of different ways to look at this and to go about it. But the most important thing that I've been focusing on, alongside, of course, the Syndicate and the connections to the Syndicate, was what I've come to find out, at least, is the variations in stories told about the boys themselves and what happened to them. And case in point, the boy that I'm going to talk about on this episode. He, for me, is one of the more interesting cases. He was noted as Dean's first victim. And if you know the case, then you know it's Jeffrey Allen Konen. And so the hypothetical story has been perpetuated as facts in the story of this kid. And I think that there's more to figure out here when you look at the police reports. And if you're trying to figure out whether our hypothesis that Dean and his associates were connected to a larger syndicate. On this episode, we're going to dig into the case of Jeffrey Allen Konen. Sorry about the ramble. And we're going to dig into the police reports, and we're going to paint the colors of the context. Let's get started. I'm Jen Schaefer, and this is Crude Acts Season 3, The Houston Mass Murders, The Syndicate, Part 6. When this kid, Jeffrey Allen Konen, who went by Jeff, went missing on September 25th, 1970, he was an 18-year-old college freshman at the University of Texas in Austin. There, he lived in a duplex near campus at 3100 Speedway. He had a couple of roommates. One of them was a guy named John Lopez. That day that he went missing, he and his roommate John made their way to Houston from Austin. I've read conflicting stories about this, but apparently these guys, Jeff and John, went to Bergstrom Air Force Base first. And they got a ride with, at the time of the police report, was an unknown man who drove a 1965 white Ford Galaxy with blue interior. The driver from Austin to Houston dropped them off in the Galleria area that evening, and that's where Jeff vanished. That's the story. His dad reported him missing to HPD the next day. A couple days later, Jeff's older brother, Jim, along with their family lawyer, came to the police department. Jim told HPD some helpful information that his brother had a bonded scholarship check on him for $250, and that check hadn't been cashed. And he monitored his bank account, and no money had been taken from his bank account. And Jim also talked to John Lopez to see if John knew where his brother was. According to him, and this is what John said to Jim, he said that the man who gave them a ride from Austin to Houston was a white male, around 21 years old, 6 feet tall, 170 pounds, neat, dark brown hair. And John told Jim that he didn't know his name, but he knew that the guy had traffic court on Tuesday the 22nd between 1 and 2 p.m. for a speeding offense. Side note, I personally think it's odd to ride with someone in a car for several hours to know these details about their court date, but not know or remember their name. That's weird to me, but maybe that's just me. So Jeff disappeared. This is the next day. Jim goes talks to him. Later that same evening, a man named Mr. Bob Park, who was friends with the Konens, called the police department to let him know that he investigated that traffic court story and told them he couldn't find anything and that it was more than likely a made-up story. Again, that's weird. Why would John make up that story? Moving on, same evening, the 28th, 3 days after Jeffrey Konen went missing, 7:30 p.m., a young man named Lynn, it's either Knupper or I'm sure it's not Knupper because it's Kneupper. Anyway, this guy Lynn was a college student at San Jac who lived off Raspberry Street in Pasadena. He told HPD that he picked up a hitchhiking college student off Voss and I-10. He said he was on his way to Galveston and that he dropped this hitchhiker off at the 225 exit near Pasadena. So that's about where 610 and 225 meet, and that is right near Pasadena, where Dean Corll lived, where his dad lived at the time, and where he would come to live later. The next day, on the 29th at 11:30 a.m., police discovered who the driver of the white Ford Galaxy was. And this guy's name was Bruce LeGrand. He was another University of Texas student who lived in an apartment complex about 3.5 miles away from where Jeff and John lived. He came forward to Austin PD and told them he dropped John Lopez off at San Felipe and Voss at 6:15 and then Jeffrey Konen off at Westheimer and Voss at 6:30 p.m. Those intersections are within minutes of each other, but Houston traffic, that could be a fair timeline. Bruce said that Jeffrey's last words to him were he was going to hitch a ride to his girlfriend's house in West University, and that was the last time that he saw him. He said that he was walking east on the east side of Westheimer, and that would be towards the loop and into the city towards the direction of his house and his girlfriend's house in Westview. Bruce said after he dropped Jeff off, he arrived at his parents' house at 6:45 p.m. He then gave the police his dad's contact information. Bruce's dad was this man named Leslie LeGrand, who was a prominent attorney, and he was a Methodist minister. I guess he pastored or ministered at some of the big Methodist church. So he was pretty high up in the Methodist church. And this family lived in the Memorial area, about 7.5 miles away from where Jeff was dropped off. Going the other way, by the way. So They questioned Leslie Legrand, and he told him that his son Bruce got home around 7 p.m. on Friday the 25th, that he showed up a little late, telling him that he had a flat tire, and the guys he was with helped him change it. From there were plenty of people calling in saying that they saw Jeff. A woman called in and stated that she'd seen him that Friday, approximately 6:30 p.m. on Westheimer and Voss, hitchhiking outbound. That would be inbound. It said outbound on the report. Jeffrey's father told them a man at the Enco Car Center at Buffalo Speedway in Alabama said that he saw Jeff that Friday at approximately 7 p.m. And basically the kid fit his description. Dr. Hildebrand, professor from the physics department at the University of Houston, he also called in and stated that he saw a young man that looked like Jeff hitching a ride on Buffalo Speedway near Bissonnette. So hold on for a little second. I want to talk about this guy, Dr. Hildebrand. Dr. Bernard Hildebrand. He wasn't a part of the U of H faculty. So if you just kind of read it and you read the one off, you're like, oh, a professor from U of H saw him. No, he was actually an Atomic Energy Commission physicist who was sent to Houston from Washington, D.C. The AEC was the primary source of funding for physics departments across the United States in the 1960s, 1970s. In September 1970, Dr. Hildebrand was in Houston to determine whether or not the University of Houston physics department would receive some major federal funding, a decision that could make or break them. Spoiler alert, they did get their funding, so go Cougs. I just thought that it was interesting that one of the people who contacted HPD was a man not even from Houston, and he told him where he saw this kid. So back to Jeff. With all of those calls, I want to kind of map out where his supposed path was according to the tips. So you got Westheimer and Voss. Westheimer and Voss over there at the Galleria area. And then you've got Buffalo Speedway in Alabama. And that's going to be like River Oaks, Montrose area. And then you're going to get Buffalo Speedway in Bissonnette, which is going to be the West Ute area. So that is the way he would walk to get to where his girlfriend lived, which was around 3800 University Boulevard. It would also be the way that he would even take to go to his own house, which was off Underwood and Buffalo Speedway. It would take him, of course, more than a half an hour to walk. So according to the timeline, but if he hitched a ride here to there, then it would make sense that he got there quicker. If he made it all the way to Buffalo Speedway in West University, his neighborhood, what happened? Why didn't he make it? How did he run into Dean Corll or his accomplices? The story is that he was dropped off at the Galleria area, and that's where Corll snagged him. That Corll lived in the Yorktown apartments, but that doesn't actually all line up. So when David Brooks gave a statement to HPD, he mentioned that Dean Corll lived off Bellefontaine Street, which is a couple of streets over from Underwood Street, where Jeff's family lived. Brooks stated at this particular place he killed a boy, and days before Jeff's appearance on September 21st, Dean Corll newly put down a deposit at the Pine Lodge Apartments off 2747 Houston Avenue, which is in the Heights. But where he lived right before that is unaccounted for. So Westview of Bellefontaine does fit this timeline. Now, if we put him living in Westview, near Jeff's home address, they could have possibly met before his abduction. We know that Dean's MO was to lure them in, to groom them, to assault them, kill them, bury them. Perhaps he saw Jeff walking home and invited him to his place and did that thing that he did. But you could add to that Roy Ames also lived in West University at the time, so who knows? But there is a likelihood that if Dean was in that area, I don't know, that they could have crossed paths before. Things do continue to get weird in the Konen case when looking through these police reports, on September 29th at 9:30 p.m., a woman named Mrs. Lee called into HPD with a tip. She claimed to be the owner of Dixie Employment Agency at 3311 Richmond Avenue. She was reading the paper. She recognized Jeff's picture. She said he looked a lot like a kid who was in her office around 3 p.m. that day. She said he claimed to be 19 years old. He lived on Brays Valley with his cousin, which is a little street that's in the Meyerland area. She said this kid wanted a job, was extremely nervous, and he abruptly left, telling her that he left his apartment door open, which is weird. Reason she called HPD is she remembered him saying that he had a former roommate named John Lopez. She told police to call her office tomorrow so she could look at the application and to be sure when they called to ask specifically for her and no one else. That's what it says in the report. And that was it. There was no follow up with that. That, of course, could be absolutely nothing but a mistake in identity. But I don't know. It also could have been an intentional call to throw off detectives or something else. I want to remind you that criminal organizations have been known to use fake employment agencies as fronts to lure young individuals into prostitution and doing illegal things. And I looked up one Mrs. Lee and Dixie Employment Agency, and I couldn't find it. That doesn't mean it didn't exist. It doesn't mean anything. But with no accessible follow-up reports, who knows? It's an interesting little part of the puzzle. But hang on to your butts, because this is when it gets weirder and things get a little more intense. On September 30th, the very next day that lady called in, Jeff's father got a phone call from an unknown man demanding ransom money for the return of his son. The amount was not disclosed in the report. But that wasn't the only one. A woman also called the same day at the Konen residence. At that time, there were people over at the house. A boy named Mike answered the phone, probably a neighbor boy or a family friend. He hands the phone to mom. Mom gets on the phone. The lady on the line told her that they have Jeffrey and they will bring him back for $5,000. Mr. Konen was right there. So he takes the phone away from Mrs. Konen and then he demands to speak with his son, and the woman on the phone hung up. Mr. Konen then called the FBI about it. He spoke with an agent, last name Paul, Agent Paul, who tells him to contact the police. So Harriet Konen does that. Detective Holmes tells him they'll look into putting an isolator on his phone. You know, there's a lot of talk about the mishandling of these cases, which I totally agree. But I will say this, at least regarding this case, I did read Detective Ira Holmes' names all over these reports, and he followed up on a lot of leads and he put a lot of effort in, you can tell. So I just wanted to say that and give him a little kudos. Detective Holmes and FBI agent Paul had a conversation about FBI involvement with the case. Holmes asked the FBI for help. Agent Paul said that he already looked into it, and the U.S. attorney told him there's no indication that the kid had been removed from the state. So they have no jurisdiction at that time, so they couldn't, or more so, wouldn't help. Something interesting to note, though. The United States Attorney for the Southern District of Texas from 1969 to 1974 was this guy named Anthony Ferris. So that's who that is that he was talking about. It's widely understood in politics that the U.S. attorney appointments are political patronage positions. So Nixon, who was president at the time, appointed this guy, Anthony Ferris. And the reason he appointed this guy is because he had a strong connection to Senator John Tower. And Senator John Tower made some history because he was one of the first Republicans to become U.S. Senator of Texas since the Reconstruction era. Tower was a huge supporter of Ferris, and so he helped him get this job. And so he was the United States Attorney for the Southern District of Texas from 1969 to 1974. Something interesting to note about Tower, he was also a supporter of another man. He was a paid consultant and liaison for Robert Maxwell, who is Ghislaine Maxwell's dad. For those of you who don't know about him, Robert Maxwell was a British media mogul guy. He was a member of Parliament. He built a vast publishing empire. He mysteriously died at sea, disappearing from his boat Lady Ghislaine in 1991. After he died, quote, it was revealed that he'd stolen millions from his employees' pension fund. And then there are the unproven allegations that you can find now if you get on YouTube or Rumble or wherever. Allegations that he was an agent for both Soviet and Israeli intelligence agencies. And of course, there are the other accusations, the Epsteinian kind, if you will. Apparently, Senator John Tower was paid a lot of money from Robert Maxwell. And that went into a Swiss bank account. And even if you want to go even more conspiratorial, he also allegedly arranged meetings for Robert Maxwell with high-level officials at U.S. nuclear facilities. And he also helped Maxwell sell a version of the PROMIS software to these labs that contained a backdoor accessible by Israeli intelligence. If you watch the docuseries, The Octopus, it's going to be that. So go watch that, by the way. I think The Octopus is fascinating, and it's on Netflix. So I know that was a tangent, but I hope that you're starting to tie together some things. There's some wild, weird things going on. And I mentioned this before. I really want to write a book on this because there's just so much. If you go on YouTube and you watch some of these videos with people have their little crazy boards connecting people, there's a lot to it. Visuals do make it easier to understand. But regarding the case, I just thought it was interesting that this senator helped this U.S. attorney who didn't want to look into the case of Jeffrey Konen, and this guy was tied to Robert Maxwell, because you can't make that up. But back to Jeffrey. After the Konen family gets those ransom calls, an FBI agent by the name of Bill Johnson goes into HPD. And what he told them is he talked to the boy who intercepted the call at the Konen house, and that the boy said the caller was definitely a colored person. That's a direct quote from the report. He asked for all the paperwork on the case and told them to contact him with more information. And I think that's funny because I thought there was no jurisdiction and they weren't looking into it. The next tip was called in on October 2nd. Jeffrey, at this point, had been missing a week. A woman calls into HPD, claims to be a friend of the Konen family, says her name is Mrs. John Gateby. She tells the police that her friend Betty called her up and told her that Jeff had been found, that he was with a Catholic priest named Father Robert Blankenstein, pastor of a Houston church on the other side of town, and that he was at St. Vincent de Paul. She called HPD, but said that she also hadn't confirmed the information. So she's like, let me check into it and I'll call you back. So then she calls back an hour later and says, oh, I was wrong. Jeff is still missing. And you know what? Come to think of it, she said that the call didn't sound like her friend Betty at all. It seemed like it was maybe a prank call. I don't know who would call a friend of the family with a prank call like that. That seems really weird. And it sounds like it could have been intentional misdirection, but I don't have anything to prove that. And just remember, Dean Corll's girlfriend was named Betty. So coincidence, maybe, but also Betty and Dean were friends for 15 years. And that's according to Betty. So who knows what Betty knew? On October 6th, a friend of Jeff's named Earl Mackey gives conflicting information about Jeff's whereabouts to HPD. He said that Jeff was at Mr. Glenn car wash on the day he disappeared. And his sister, who worked at Jack in the Box, also saw him that day too with some friends. Again, could have been nothing but a mistaken identity, but there you go. On October 29th, and this is an interesting tip, Mrs. Konen called HPD and said some friends of Jeff told her that a group known as the CRF was beating up some boys at Westheimer and Hillcroft. So these guys, the CFR, beat up some boys at Westheimer and Hillcroft. The boys, you know what? I had a comment, someone saying that I repeat myself a lot, and I do. So I was like, do I do something about it, or do I just keep repeating myself? I'm going to keep repeating myself. And Kim, the commenter, you don't need to listen. Anyway, so the CFR beat up some boys at Westheimer and Hillcroft. Repeated it again. What do you think? And the boys who were victims of this group were on motorcycles, and the ones who beat them up were in pickup trucks. So the CFR and pickup trucks beat up these boys on motorcycles. Jeffrey Konen's mom explained that she'd come to find out that this group, the CFR group, was known to pick up, quote, hippie-type boys with long hair. They would beat them up and cut their hair, and some of them they made into slaves. And she wondered if they could have done that to Jeffrey. So that's in a police report. This is Sarah Konen talking to police about the CFR group. I looked up CFR and I couldn't find anything. So if you can, listeners, let me know. And you're going to have to reach me. Don't do it at my fan mail. Go to my website and send me an email, or find me on Facebook, follow me there, send me a message, Instagram, whatever. Here's what I did find out about what was going on, quote, in the hippie bashing realm. So in 1970, there was a known pattern of it. Hippies were getting bashed, you could say. Victims were often beaten, threatened, abducted, and then they were abandoned. And while many survived, some actually disappeared and were never found. And I'd like to dig further into those cases. This is just what I read about it. What's interesting to note is this was at a time that Operation Chaos was in place by the CIA, as well as an operation by the FBI at COINTELPRO. In 1970, Houston was a major focal point for the FBI and COINTELPRO, which is a counterintelligence program. This program aimed to, quote, neutralize organizations that they deemed subversive. So the program primarily targeted Houston civil rights leaders and activists and anti-war activists, and they used tactics that combined local police force with federal surveillance. And its success relied on close cooperation with HPD intelligence division to execute raids, and they legally harassed people who they thought were dissidents. Apparently, the FBI, and here we are, they're like, oh, we don't have any jurisdiction. Oh, wait, never mind. Give us all the paperwork. Oh, wait, never mind. But they're having these programs like COINTELPRO. But apparently, the FBI funded a lot of groups that did this in 1970. In Chicago, they had the Legion of Justice, which was a violent paramilitary group that operated as a, quote, vigilante front for intelligence agents. This violence also existed in Houston as well, where similar groups and the police themselves targeted the long-haired hippie people and the counterculture boys and men. And newspapers and police records totally acknowledge this. Of course, legally were fragmented into singular isolated cases, so it prevented the recognition of a unified pattern that was happening. Finding unified patterns is why we're doing this, because it was missed back then. And while we don't have the information that they had back then, finding the patterns is really the only way to move forward. But doesn't that all sound familiar? Like, not following up on things. I think not following up on things is one of the biggest failures in this case. And we know that. Missing the connections, missing what was going on. There's a guy on Reddit, maybe a girl, I don't know, the name was unisex. He kind of took that position of the parents didn't want to know that the sex trafficking thing was happening and that it could have been connected to these serial killings. And I'm like, no. We want to know. You would want to know if your kid was out there and this happened. and this was going on, and absolutely not. I would want to know. I want to know everything. I want you to paint it all for me. And as a parent of teenage boy, you want to know these things because you want to keep your kids safe. So anyway, disagree with him, but whatever. After the CFR tip from Mrs. Konen, there was just very little follow-up after that. There was a few false sightings of him in Louisiana. We know they're false sightings because he didn't go to Louisiana. The last note on Jeff's case was on March 26, 1973. And another FBI agent checked in for updates, and there were none. Less than 5 months after that, they found Jeffrey Conen's remains on High Island Beach with the remains of 5 other men and boys. Elmer Wayne Henley and David Brooks led officers to the graves, though according to them, neither of them were there when Konen was abducted and killed. They hadn't joined Dean until much later. Of course, David first, later in 71, and then Wayne in 72. So either Dean did this by himself, he did it with other accomplices other than Brooks and Henley, or it was maybe another adjacent group. There's no evidence, no definitive evidence that says Jeffrey Konen was killed by Dean Corll. The only thing is that he was buried with bodies of other boys that were linked to Dean Corll. So the whole reason I wanted to go into these reports is to rethink the Konen case. His story has always been widely assumed without considering all the surrounding information. I mentioned some of them already, but here's some more. 1.5 miles away from where Jeff and his roommate John Lopez were dropped off was a small area of Houston known as Sin Alley. I've talked about it before. It was off of Mid Lane between Westheimer and Richmond. Marty Jones was actually known to live there, and he's another victim of Dean Corll's. It was stated that he lived there with a drug dealer named Satan. That's something that I read. But 2 years before Jeff's disappearance, a Houston man, 31-year-old Alan Berg, vanished after taking a call at a Sin Alley dive bar that was called the Brass Jug. 6 months later, authorities discovered his remains in a roadside ditch outside Surfside, which is a beach nearby Houston. So we got Galveston, we've got Surfside. Investigators traced his murder to a man named Charles Harrelson, a professional hitman for the Dixie Mafia, also actor Woody Harrelson's father. Court records show that he accepted $1,500 from, quote, someone with a grudge against Alan's father. So he was hired to kill Alan. Harrelson's girlfriend, her name's Sandra Attaway, she witnessed the murder and cooperated with prosecutors. But legendary defense attorney, and you've heard this name before, Percy Foreman, the same attorney who represented child sex traffickers and pornographers Huey Moe and Charles Booth, successfully blocked her testimony by claiming common law marriage privileges. I think it's interesting that Percy Foreman represented them and then went to represent Charles Harrelson. The jury returned a not guilty verdict despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary. All this time later, Alan's brother David still maintains that Houston's power structure as well as legal technicalities allowed a killer to walk free. He wrote about it in a book called Run, Brother, Run. So that happened, 68. This happens to Jeff, 1970, and Jeff Konen's case is an odd one. If you look at Jeff with all the other victims, he stands out from Dean's victim patterns. While most of his later victims came from broken homes in rougher areas like the Houston Heights, Spring Branch, the Konens lived in Rice Village, the West U area, one of Houston's more respectable neighborhoods. His dad was not only in the picture, but he was a great provider. He had a successful business, and I go into it in the book. I talk about what he did for a living. He had a successful business, they had money. His parents were still married, and his home life was very stable. He had people looking for him. Next door neighbor boy was over there looking for him. He had friends looking for him. His brother was really doing a lot of work to find him because Jeff just wasn't a kid to run off. Like he didn't fit that profile at all. He was a very good student. He attended St. Vincent de Paul for junior high. He graduated salutatorian from St. Thomas High School, Catholic prep school. It's well known in Houston. Lots of powerful men who shaped Texas politics during the 1960s and 70s went to this school. Congressman Bill Archer, State Senator Henry Grover, George Strait Jr., the Strait Jesuit family people, George Strait Jr. went to St. Thomas High School. Lots of powerful dudes. But of course, there is scandal connected to both of these schools, actually. If you fast forward to 2019, when the Archdiocese of Galveston-Houston finally published its list of clergymen with credible allegations of sexual abuse of minors, several names connected to both St. Thomas and St. Vincent de Paul surfaced. So while Jeff was at these schools, these priests, I think that they were convicted, even if they'd pass away, that they'd found credible evidence that they were committing SA. Something weird to note is I thumbed through St. Thomas's yearbook section, and I noticed that Jeff's senior year, he was a National Merit Scholar. He was in drama. He was in the Booster Club. He played intramural football. He went off to UT for college, which is no small feat. We all know how UT, even back then, was hard to get into. Despite all that, Jeff's name does not appear in the St. Thomas in Memoriam section of their website. So if they're listening to this, you need to get on that. There's no reason that he should not be in your in memoriam section. So add him. With a full examination of Jeffrey Konen's case, questions linger. So what I did was I tried to get in touch with the boys he came into Houston from Austin. I reached out to relatives of John Lopez. We've emailed back and forth. I've yet to solidify any sort of interview, but that's out there in the universe. Bruce LeGrand sadly died in the 80s. So I'm not sure how, but it seems like it might have been tragic. I briefly messaged his son, but I still don't know much. He just kind of loosely messaged me and then kind of ghosted me. So Jeffrey's brother, Jim, we also messaged each other, and eventually he ended up passing on being interviewed about Jeff's case. So almost everything that I've told you here is from police report. And there's just a whole lot of holes in the narrative. I believe the story of where he was abducted from is definitely, probably, maybe incorrect. I don't think that he was taken from the Galleria area. I believe he was taken closer to home. And it could have been someone that he knew. I've read threads where people talk about Jeff hitchhiking, but there was someone who went to school with him at UT and said that she's like, no, he's not a hitchhiker. So I don't know, whatever. I know it was common back then and everyone did it. But if we take a closer look at the area of where he lived and where I think he was taken from, he was lured into a car, maybe taken to a party, or maybe he wasn't even picked up off the street at all. Maybe he was picked up at a place that kids or teenagers or young adults went to. So some people think that West University of Area Houston is innocent. It's a nicer part of town, and for most part it is. But back then, there were a couple of bars and clubs set up that hosted some illegal activity and some illegal folk. So a friend of mine who grew up in the Houston Heights, he said, find a place called The Office. We all knew about this place, and that's where some local organized crime stuff went down. That's where some people met that were doing that sort of thing. And he said there's even a man who everyone was afraid of from the Dixie Mafia who ran business out of this place called The Office. So I go, I'm looking it up. I can't find it. I spent a lot of time trying to find it. Nothing. There's nothing like that in the Heights until I finally discovered a place that was in West University in the late 1960s, early 70s. Before Buffalo Speedway was smoothed out and respectful, there was a small, noisy pocket of nightlife tucked into the Buffalo Pharmacy Center. This is at 5245 Buffalo Speedway. And this is the place where Jeff was possibly last seen. Somebody said, it was the professor, Hildebrand, said that he saw him at Buffalo Speedway in Bissonnette. So in that little area was a strip center. And in that little strip center was a bar called the Second Office. And that was an after-work bar that stayed busy long after work hours ended. It was a place where beer moves fast and pool games get personal and money changes hands quietly. And it was a place where a lot of bookmakers went. It was a place to go place bets. It's a gambling hub, if you will. And the crowd was young, mostly men, office workers, students, locals, but not everyone there had a 9-to-5. There were also a lot of transient type people, sketchy people. The Second Office didn't necessarily host organized crime from what I can tell, but it was something like it, something a little looser and murkier, if you will. So there was some shady stuff going on. And this, of course, could be where Jeff could have found his way into the void. Because we know that the boys like to go play pool places and that they like to hang out places. This is where he could have met Dean Corll or someone connected to him. Roy Ames, like I said, lived in West University. But any of Dean's past accomplices that we don't know much about could have been out there doing stuff. So there's that. Beyond the bars, there was the Palace Bowling Alley. Remember last episode, I said I'd bring it up again. This bowling alley was in Bel Air, right by West U, very close to where Jeff Konen lived. It's 1.5 miles to be exact. It was owned by a man who was on the board of St. Thomas High School, where Jeff went. And this guy sold his bowling alley in 1973 to the dudes who own Merchant Park Lanes, where the Waldrop brothers were heading to, that's another story altogether, right? So that's a lot of what ifs. It's a lot of who knows. A lot of speculation has occurred to fill in the gap. This speculation is often passed as facts. But what is the truth? The answer is we don't know. All we can do is keep weaving a tapestry from all these loose threads. I went through all the police reports. I hope there are more out there that maybe I didn't get my hands on. And if anyone's read anything and I didn't talk about them and you read something about Jeff Konen, let me know. Send that over. But the city of Houston and the turbulence of the times of 1970. The state of Texas trying its best to hold on to political control, budding energy crisis that would soon become actualized. And here we are in a nation itself that was at war with itself. We were all fighting. People think that we're politically and culturally divided now like we never have been before. Check out those years in the late 60s and early 70s, But none of this is new. None of these fights are new. And the political playbooks, they're all pretty much the same with different actors casted in the well-established roles. People are thinking like, oh, this is new. Like, no, we've been at each other's throats for a very long time. And I think a big part of this, something that I want to dig into further, is that there is a world of covert dirt. That was huge at the time, covert dirt, keeping tabs on people. Nixon did it. And he got his tips from J. Edgar Hoover. J. Edgar Hoover was the master at collecting dirt on people. And even if you look at the Watergate scandal, it was not about like what they wanted destroyed or what they wanted to not get out was Hoover's covert dirt. So one day I'm going to talk about that because I really want to. But I want to leave you with questions. Why are we accepting all of these narratives as fact? We don't know that. We don't know that. We don't know exactly what happened to Jeff. We just know from where he was last seen to in 1973, his body was found on a beach. That's all we know. All of that stuff in the middle, even from the police reports, that could be incorrect information. But we have to use logic. We have to lay it out in a pattern, and that's all we can do at this point. But I still think it's worth it because I still think that we can find out that more was going on. And I think that more was going on. I think that Dean Corll was connected to a syndicate. And so that's my 2 cents on it. I'm going to talk more about some final things and I'm going to tie things together on my next episode because I think we've kind of beat this horse and I'm ready to move on to something else, to be honest. But I still have a lot of work to put together to tie in the book that I'm going to do about this. And I'm excited, as someone commented that they're excited about it. I'm excited about it too. So I just need to finish it. I have another book that I've been working on for years. I thought I would be done. It's just there's some legal hiccups that I've got to get around. So, and it's been tick-tocking and we're waiting to figure out what to do. Anyway, next episode, we're going to wrap up this Dean Corll season and the Houston mass murders. And I'm really excited to do that. So tune in for that. For now, I'm out of time. So stay warm out there. We're about to get a freeze here in Houston. Stay warm, stay safe, stay home, and listen to true crime podcasts. I'm Jen Schaefer, and you've been listening to Crude Acts, Texas True Crime Podcast. Thank you, Russell, for doing my sound. I got a new setup, so we've had to do some troubleshooting with that. Amy, thanks for helping me navigate a lot of these things. I've got some exciting stuff on deck. I'm really stoked about that. I've switched over to Spotify for creators, so go give me some love on Spotify. The more we share that and get that out, my numbers are really good, so I'm just saying. Also, I've had some shows reach out, so we've got some things in the works with that. Before I go, if you know anything that I went over that's incorrect, or if you have some information to fill in that I didn't say or I don't know, please contact me. You can go to www.crudex.com, shoot me an email. You can find me on Facebook. You can find me on Instagram. You can find me on TikTok. I'm doing that. So I look forward to hearing from you, even if it's a thumbs up, keep going. Have a good one. I will see you guys next time.